Good morning. Welcome to the British Columbia Lung Association Air Quality Webinar Series. Today's topic is Air Quality Management Plan Update from the Fraser Valley Regional District. Our speaker today will be Rebecca Abernethy. Rebecca has been an Environmental Services Coordinator at Fraser Valley Regional District for the past year. She works on all topics related to the region's air quality portfolio, being an active member of interagency air-related committees, chairing the Regional Ground Level Ozone Strategy Steering Committee for the Lower Fraser Valley, developing education and research material for schools, and working with partners on monitoring and emission inventory projects. Prior to joining the FVRD, Rebecca worked for a consulting firm assessing occupational and environmental health hazards. She completed her MSc in Environmental Health from the School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. On a personal level, Rebecca is passionate about walking the talk with respect to emissions reductions and air quality protection, and is an avid cyclist and proud owner of an electric vehicle. Now, before we begin, things to note. You may type in questions as they occur to you, and those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the BC Lung Association website. All registrants will receive a link to the slides and the vocal. So it is my pleasure to introduce Rebecca.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your interest in this webinar. So as indicated, I will be providing an update on the FVRD's new Air Quality Management Plan, which is currently under development. So just to give a brief outline on the topics I'll be covering today, I'll start with a brief introduction to the Fraser Valley Regional District itself. I'll then provide a brief air quality overview, including looking at some of the monitoring data trends in the Fraser Valley, emission inventory data and forecasts, as well as the location of the Fraser Valley Regional District in the Lower Fraser Valley Airshed. I'll give an overview of existing programs, committees, and initiatives that are currently underway with respect to air quality protection in the Fraser Valley. And then I will get into the air quality management plan itself more, talking about the history of the existing plan and the process and proposed timeline for updating the new plan. And then we'll provide a sneak peek at our intended directions with our new air quality management plan. So I'm going to start off by posting a disclaimer, which is basically to say that our new air quality management plan is very much still a work in progress. So everything that is presented today and discussed does represent the anticipated direction, but we do need to do more consultation and ultimately have approval of the FVRD board before this comes into effect. I'll also note that what I discussed today is not a comprehensive listing of everything that will be in the plan, but rather some highlights and interesting features. So I'll start off by talking about the Fraser Valley Regional District. So we are located in southwestern British Columbia, directly to the east of Metro Vancouver. The FVRD consists of 6 member municipalities, which include Abbotsford, Chilliwack, Harrison Hot Springs, Hope, the District of Kent, and Mission, as well as 8 electoral areas. So the Fraser Valley Regional District ranges from highly populated urban communities, such as in Abbotsford, to rural communities. So there's a wide range of different communities that are found here. The FVRD is home to about 290,000 people, and major economic activities in the region include agricultural activity as well as tourism. Now, with respect to Air Quality Management Authority, I think it's important to set the context of what level of authority the FVRD has. So the FVRD has Air Quality Planning Authority that was provided by the province in 1992. However, it is the BC Ministry of Environment that has regulatory authority when it comes to regulating and permitting the discharge of air emissions in the Fraser Valley. Many people may know that our neighboring regional district, Metro Vancouver, has regulatory authority over air emissions in their region. However, it is important to note that they are actually the only regional district in British Columbia with this authority at the current time. So the FVRD has planning authority and can implement programs, but we need to work closely with the Ministry of Environment on large permitted sources. This next slide shows a map of the Fraser Valley Regional District, and again it's just provided for context and to show that the FVRD is actually quite a large area geographically. It covers, as I mentioned, large cities, but also a lot of rural communities and wilderness areas. It's about 13,000 square kilometers in size. I'm now going to set the context of the location of the Fraser Valley Regional District in the Lower Fraser Valley Airshed. So the image that is on your screen shows the Lower Fraser Valley Airshed, which is shared with Metro Vancouver to the west of the FVRD and part of Whatcom County to the south in the United States. This is a very complex airshed because of the topography and meteorology that characterize this location. So the Coast and Cascade Mountains physically bound the airshed into basically a funnel-shaped pattern that narrows as you go from west to east, and you'll notice that the Fraser Valley Regional District is in that narrowing portion of the valley. This overall valley is also home to many people, and in fact in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley Regional District combined, there are millions of BC residents. The majority of the population lives here, so that means that there are a lot of people breathing the air and also a lot of emission sources, which makes it a very complex area to manage and plan for air quality, but a very interesting one as well. And I'll also note, because of the geography of the Fraser Valley's location in the eastern portion of the airshed, at times due to stagnation events or inversion or due to dominant wind flow patterns, air contaminants can sometimes accumulate in the eastern portion of the valley and reach elevated levels. And we have seen that in the past, particularly with ground level ozone. And so this is one of many reasons why we are embarking on a plan to better improve air quality in our region going forward, and have done so in the past as well. So I'm now going to provide a brief overview of monitoring in the Lower Fraser Valley, and I'll just note that there are now 28 stations in the combined Lower Fraser Valley network with Metro Vancouver and the FVRD. 6 of the sites are located in the FVRD. The newest one was installed in Mission in late 2014, which was an exciting development. So most of these stations monitor criteria air contaminants, things such as nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, carbon monoxide. However, there are several locations within the network and within the FVRD. These locations are Abbotsford Airport and Chilliwack, which are so-called super sites. They measure a variety of other contaminants, such as toxic air pollutants, including metals and speciated volatile organic compounds. So some sites collect a lot more monitoring data. I'm now going to provide a very brief overview of some of the air quality monitoring trends over time within the Lower Fraser Valley network. And I'll just note that Metro Vancouver, in partnership with the Fraser Valley Regional District, do complete annual monitoring reports that are very comprehensive, that look at the whole network, different pollutants, different trends, and so there is a wealth of background information supporting some of the highlights that I will be showing here. So the figure that is in front of you is showing the carbon monoxide ambient concentration trend over the past 20 years or so, and you can see very clearly that for this particular contaminant, concentrations of both short-term peak values and annual average values have been decreasing by quite a bit over the past 20 years. And this is a similar story with some other air pollutants as well, which is a good news story. However, I will also emphasize that there is a lot of research to demonstrate that there are no safe levels of exposure for many air contaminants. So that means there are continued benefits with reducing emissions and reducing ambient concentrations even further than we see now. But, as I'll show in a moment, this trend line is not the same for all air pollutants in the Lower Fraser Valley. So the next one that I'm going to highlight is for ground level ozone. And as you can see in the figure, concentrations, particularly of background levels, the annual average trend line, has been remaining relatively stationary or even increasing slightly over time. So this represents a pollutant. It is of particular interest in the Fraser Valley Regional District specifically that we need to take additional action on to reduce concentrations and reduce exposure and associated adverse impacts from this pollutant. Metro Vancouver also completes a very detailed emissions inventory for the entire Lower Fraser Valley airshed every 5 years. So I'm going to be showing some highlights from the most recent emissions inventory available from 2010. I will also make a quick note at this point, although I won't be showing data from it specifically, that in addition to an emissions inventory for criteria air contaminants and greenhouse gases, there have also been 2 emissions inventories and human health risk assessment reports for toxic air pollutants in the Lower Fraser Valley. So that includes Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley Regional District. And some of the work from those studies over the past decade or so have also informed some of the strategies and actions that you'll be seeing later on in this presentation. So back to the figure that is shown in front of you. So again, this is from the 2010 emissions inventory, and it shows emissions of PM 2.5 or fine particulate matter across the Lower Fraser Valley. You can see that over the past 2 decades, emissions have decreased by a fair amount. However, the forecast is showing that emissions are projected to rise slightly. Again, a good reason to develop a plan and some strategies to keep that trend line going downward. Digging into the data a little bit further, we look at the dominant sources of fine PM in the FVRD, and we find that mobile sources, agricultural sources, and fugitive dust account for pretty sizable portions of the sources. Heating as well plays a prominent role, and I'll just note that under that one specifically, we find that residential wood smoke is a dominant contributor to PM 2.5 from heating. Going back to some of the emissions inventory projections, this one is shown for ammonia, and you can see that the middle band is the FVRD's contribution to ammonia in the Lower Fraser Valley. It's quite substantial because we are a large agricultural community. And the other thing to note on this figure is that ammonia emissions are projected to rise over the coming decades. Again, a trend that we hope to turn in the other direction. And to change the topic slightly, but it does tie into something that I'll be discussing later on with the projected directions of our plan. This just shows the principal sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the Fraser Valley Regional District. You can see that on-road mobile sources, so light and heavy-duty vehicles alone, account for the single largest source of greenhouse gases, followed by heating, largely due to natural gas, as well as agricultural sources, which is largely due to animals themselves, such as cattle and poultry. So I'm now going to provide a brief overview, and again, this is not a complete listing of everything that the FVRD is currently working on, but an overview of programs and initiatives that we are currently undertaking and committees that we are a part of with respect to air quality. So some programs and initiatives currently underway include our promotion of education material with respect to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles have a very clear air quality benefit because they produce zero emissions. We also host a number of electric vehicle charging stations throughout the region, and we're continuing to support expanded infrastructure for these vehicles. In addition, we offer a wood stove exchange program and smart burning education program to reduce emissions from residential wood smoke. The FVRD is also involved in directly planning for transit, which again takes cars off the roads and reduces emissions that way. A very exciting initiative that we have underway right now is the Fraser Valley Express bus. And this is a bus that will connect Langley to Chilliwack and Abbotsford, and will be starting in April of this year. And that means that when that bus route gets underway, one will be able to take public transit from Lions Bay to Harrison Hot Springs, which, if you think about it, is quite a substantial distance. So it's a really exciting initiative that we are working on. And we're also engaging with the Fraser Basin Council to develop an education program for elementary and secondary school students on a variety of air quality related topics. And this program is expected to launch in schools in the region this spring. Now, in terms of collaboration with other agencies, the FVRD has been on the Air Care Steering Committee. And for those who may be listening from outside of British Columbia, Air Care was a light-duty vehicle emission testing program that was in place in the Lower Fraser Valley for over 20 years. It has since ended, but this same group is working on developing, and this includes the FVRD, a program to reduce emissions from heavy-duty diesel vehicles. The FVRD has also been deeply involved in developing the regional ground-level ozone strategy, which I'll be touching on a bit more later. We're involved in the BC Visibility Coordinating Committee, trying to communicate and improve visual air quality throughout the Lower Fraser Valley, so improve visibility that can be obscured due to air pollution. We're involved in the Air and Nutrient Working Group with the agricultural sector, and because we are in a shared international airshed between Canada and the United States, we also participate in the International Airshed Strategy Committee. So there's quite a lot that is already underway at the FVRD with respect to air quality programs. I'm now going to get into the air quality management plan and start by talking about the history, where we have come from with respect to the plan, and that'll be followed by where we intend to go. So the FVRD does currently have an air quality management plan. It was completed in 1998, and the cover is shown on the image on the left at the bottom of the screen. Since that time, a lot of things have changed with respect to technology and understanding of air quality issues in the Lower Fraser Valley. So in the late 2000s, there was a desire to update the plan, and actually a revised draft was completed in 2010, but it was not finalized and published. And we have found that even since 2010, there have been significant changes and new research and understanding, particularly with respect to ozone formation in the Lower Fraser Valley. So considering all of this new information, we are now redrafting again the air quality management plan and are intending to release this newest version by the end of this year. Conveniently, something that is also happening at the FVRD at this time is that our regional growth strategy is also being updated. So the existing one is shown on the bottom right. It's from 2004. The new RGS is expected to also be released in 2015. So we've been able to establish some planning commonalities through that process as well. I'm just going to mention briefly, if anyone in the audience is interested in the air quality planning process, some of the steps and resources that we have looked at in planning for this new management plan. So I was not at the FVRD when the original plan was created in 1998, nor when the next version was prepared on a preliminary basis in 2010. So one document that I have found particularly useful in rethinking about our new air quality management plan is this provincial framework for airshed planning from the Ministry of Environment, and it's just one of a number of documents that we have looked at. And it highlights 6 main steps for an air quality management planning process, and I should just indicate that we're kind of in the midst of a number of these steps. We have identified stakeholders. We will shortly be engaging with them. I just mentioned we have worked on planning synergies through the regional growth strategy. Through our emission inventory and monitoring data, we have determined priority sources. So really our next steps are going to be further engagement and actual development of the plan. And what I've shown here is just a listing of some of the air quality planning resources that we have reviewed. Again, this is provided for the benefit of anyone else who may be looking to conduct air quality planning in their own region. And I think it's very important for us to step back for a moment and just refocus on why it is we are expending so much effort on trying to improve air quality and reduce emissions in the Fraser Valley. There are obviously a number of compelling reasons to do so. The first overarching reason is because human health is adversely impacted from a number of air pollutants, and some of the outcomes can be quite serious. They can range from a number of non-cancerous to even cancerous outcomes depending on the pollutant. And as I mentioned before, there is continued benefit for many pollutants with reducing them to levels even lower than we see now. There's no safe level of exposure for a number of contaminants, so there's continued benefit from a health perspective to make the air even cleaner. Air pollution also adversely affects ecosystem health, and it has an economic impact as well. Crop yields can be reduced due to poor air quality. Tourism revenue can also be reduced if the beautiful vistas in the Fraser Valley are obscured by air pollution. And generally the quality of life can be impacted if air quality is poorer than it could be. And of course this is all taken in context of the FVRD's geographic location in the eastern portion of the Lower Fraser Valley Airshed. So I'm going to provide an overview now of the general timeline that we're working with for developing the new AQMP. So things that we've already done include review of background information and identification of stakeholders. Where we're at now is on developing and sharing a preliminary framework that'll be coming later this morning to you, and we'll also be working to engage further with stakeholders. So if you are a member of the Fraser Valley community or a neighboring district, you can look forward to hearing from us shortly to get your feedback on what we're thinking. From that, we will draft an air quality management plan based on initial feedback. This will be put out for additional feedback and comment, and then it will be revised into a plan that will be presented to the FVRD board, hopefully by the end of this calendar year. Now I am going to get into our anticipated direction for the new FVRD AQMP. And again, I will just remind you all that this is preliminary. It has not been finalized, but it is the direction that we're intending to go. So the vision that we're currently working with is to have clean, clear air for all in the Fraser Valley at all times through better understanding and continuously improving air quality. And we're guided by a number of principles in developing this plan. The first is continuous improvement. That again is the acknowledgement that continuously reducing emissions, reducing ambient concentrations of air pollutants will have continued health, environmental, and economic benefits. We'll also follow the principle of pollution prevention. This relates to the adage that prevention is better than a cure. We will follow the ideals of collective responsibility and collaboration that we already do a lot of. We will follow scientific and evidence-based decision-making, and in the absence of evidence, we'll follow the precautionary principle. And finally, where possible, we will take actions that also have co-benefits in addition to improving air quality. So we have at this time developed 4 overarching goals for the FVRD AQMP. The first of which is to reduce emissions of and exposure to criteria and toxic air contaminants to improve ambient air quality and reduce its adverse impacts. We are also looking to improve visual air quality or visibility. We want to reduce the impact of odor, and we want to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. So I'm going to now walk through all of the 4 goals with some proposed strategies and actions, and I will just give a heads up at this point that Goal 1 is the most overarching of all of them. It's going to be the most detailed, and I'll provide a more brief summary of the latter 3 goals after going through this one. So Goal 1 again, we want to reduce all emissions, criteria, and toxic air contaminants from all sources. However, in reviewing our background data, we will be focusing primarily on particulate matter, especially fine particulate matter and diesel particulate matter. And I'll just point out that the reason that we would be focusing on diesel is because our toxic air pollutant emission inventory and human health risk assessment work has shown that this contaminant by quite a large margin accounts for, presents the highest risk for developing cancer. It's a carcinogen in the Fraser Valley Regional District as well as in Metro Vancouver. So that's why we'll be focusing on that specifically. We'll also focus on reducing emissions of ammonia and looking to reduce ozone concentrations by targeting its precursors. So now I'm going to walk through different dominant emission sources and what we might do to reduce emissions from those. So the first point is to reduce emissions from light-duty vehicles. And the other thing I will mention here is that objectives that are currently underway or being worked on in some form at the FVRD are highlighted in green. We'll still be documenting them in the Air Quality Management Plan, and additional action will be needed on some of these items as well. So to reduce emissions from light-duty vehicles, we'll need to continue to make low and zero emission transportation easy and affordable. So this is promoting walking, cycling, and transit. And there's the added co-benefit with these modes of transportation of fostering physical activity and promoting a healthy lifestyle in our population. We also want to encourage zero-emission vehicle adoption and promote infrastructure that will support these vehicles. We'll work with partners to prevent backsliding from the ending of the Air Care program, and so this is developing strategies to essentially prevent old polluting vehicles that were taken off the road from coming back on the road now that Air Care has ended. And we could also explore implementing a regional anti-idling bylaw. The next sector will be to reduce emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. So I've already mentioned that we're working with a number of agency partners to develop a heavy-duty diesel vehicle emission reduction program. Another action that we can take is to determine the feasibility of installing shore power at truck stops. If you recall in the map that I showed at the beginning, the FVRD is a large geographic area, and it does cover large sections of major highways that go east and north in the province. So there is the potential to reduce emissions at some of these truck stops along those highways. We'll also be looking to reduce emissions from off-road mobile sources. So one thing that we will be looking at is determining the feasibility and options that we may have to implement a non-road diesel engine emission reduction program in the FVRD. Some of you may be aware that a program like this is currently in effect in Metro Vancouver, and we will be looking at options for implementing it in the FVRD. This could be a bit of a challenge, as I mentioned before, because the FVRD does not have regulatory authority, but we would hope to work with our partners at the Ministry of Environment to consider options in this category. We can also explore the development of a small engine emission reduction plan. Getting on to some other sources, we also want to reduce emissions from open burning. So a project that is going to be getting underway very shortly is to complete an open burning practices and policy options review in the Fraser Valley to better understand and to reduce the incidence and impact of open burning. We also want to reduce emissions from residential wood smoke. So we'll continue to offer the wood stove exchange program, but a lot of data has also been collected on wood burning, residential wood burning activity. So we may develop a wood smoke emission reduction plan to target this pollutant specifically. Of course, we will also be looking to reduce emissions from industrial sources, which will require working closely with the Ministry of Environment, who regulates those sources at the moment. But something else that I will note that has been talked about, I believe, for the past number of years, is the FVRD will, in the near future, explore the feasibility of obtaining some form of regulatory authority over our own region when it comes to air discharge. We will also continue to engage in environmental assessment processes for large projects. And we're getting to some different sources now. Agricultural sources represent a dominant source of ammonia emissions, as well as fine particulate matter emissions. So To address ammonia, we will work with the Ministry of Agriculture to promote an already developed environmental farm plan, as well as encouraging the use of best management practices for manure. Something else that we can do to reduce ammonia emissions is to explore supporting methane capture options on farms. One example of this may be through anaerobic digesters that we are starting to see on some dairy farms in the lower Fraser Valley. And to reduce dust emissions, we'll look at best management practices and encouraging them for reducing wind erosion on fields. This actually accounts for a substantial portion of fine PM emissions in the Fraser Valley. And we'll also explore options for reducing dust on prioritized unpaved roads. We're getting to ozone now. To address this contaminant, we will implement recommendations in the regional ground level ozone strategy. So this strategy recommended for the eastern portion of the Fraser Valley that volatile organic compound emissions should be reduced. So in the near term, we'll be looking to complete a VOC policy option study on how we can best reduce emissions within the Fraser Valley Regional District. We will also be developing a plan to reduce NOx, or nitrogen oxides, emissions during warm summer days, so the days that are most susceptible to ozone formation. So those are some of the main actions that are proposed for reducing emissions, but we also want to better monitor and understand air quality in the Fraser Valley. So under that category, we'll continue to work with other agencies, principally Metro Vancouver, to review the monitoring network and basically to assess where we should be monitoring for which pollutants. I mentioned at the beginning that we received a new monitoring station in late 2014. The images below are from that station in Mission, so our monitoring network has been increasing over the past several years, and we'll be looking to conduct a review on where we should go from here. The FVRD also intends to explore opportunities to acquire a mobile air monitoring unit for itself so that we can conduct specialized studies and do monitoring in locations where there is no fixed station. With respect to air quality objectives, we intend, well, of course, we will continue to abide by federal and provincial objectives that are set in place. We will conduct our own review and consider implementing our own more strict objectives for some contaminants. For example, ammonia does not have an air quality objective, and as I've been emphasizing, there are substantial emissions of ammonia in the Fraser Valley, so that may be something that we want to have a target level for. Similarly, there are a number of toxic air pollutants that don't have an air quality objective that we may consider implementing. And finally, after we have reduced emissions and hopefully reduced ambient concentrations as much as we can, we want to reduce people's exposure to these pollutants. So we'll be looking at ways to characterize and reduce exposure to ambient air pollutants that infiltrate indoors in the Fraser Valley. As many of you can imagine or probably know, people do spend the majority of their time inside, so that's an important place to work with. And we'll also be looking to work with Fraser Health and other partners to promote radon awareness. We are aware that radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in Canada, and we'll be encouraging residents and businesses to test their buildings and to mitigate where necessary. And now I just wanted to provide an example of indicators and targets that we may have for this goal. You'll notice in looking at what has been shown on the slide, we don't have specific targets set in place yet. This will obviously require a lot of discussion and consultation, but I just wanted to provide an idea of the type of indicators and targets we may be looking at. So an example for this goal could be something along the lines of reducing emissions of a particular contaminant by either a certain percentage or a certain amount relative to a baseline year, and we will be comparing, or we will be aiming to achieve that by a certain year. So we know from speaking with other agencies who have developed air quality management plans that setting reasonably specific indicators and targets and determining how you will calculate them before you implement the plan can be very useful. So we will be looking to do that so we can track our progress in a meaningful way. Okay, I'm now going to move along to goal 2, which is to improve visual air quality. And as I indicated before, a lot of the strategies and actions that will benefit this goal have already been discussed. So basically, to improve visual air quality, we will need to reduce emissions of pollutants and precursors that inhibit visual air quality. So follow the strategies listed under goal 1. In the Lower Fraser Valley, it is predominantly fine particulate matter that obscures visibility, either primary PM2.5 or secondary. And so what is shown in the figure below is how other contaminants can form secondary particulate matter. And of course, you'll note that for both PM2.5 and ammonia, a number of strategies and actions were discussed under the previous goal. We will also continue to work with the BC Visibility Coordinating Committee to support the creation and launch of a visual air quality rating tool, which should be forthcoming. We're continually looking to enhance public understanding of visual air quality and make the connection between air pollution and visibility, and continue to support scientific research on visual air quality impacts and actions in the Lower Fraser Valley. So again, I've just provided examples of potential indicators and targets. So an example of an indicator could include aiming to reduce incidences of poor visual air quality as defined by the visual air quality rating tool. And so our target could be something to the effect of having fewer than X hours or days or episodes per year and achieving that by a certain year. Moving on to goal 3, reduce the impact of odor. Again, we'll be looking to reduce emissions that cause odors in the Fraser Valley, largely following the strategies listed under goal 1. As well, we will explore options for development of an odor management strategy in the Fraser Valley Regional District. So examples of indicators that we can track to measure our progress could include something as straightforward as creating a database to track odor complaints, and the target would be to actually create and use the database by a certain date. Further down the line, we could have targets of reducing complaints to a certain number, but we first need to track them in a cohesive manner in order to ascertain trends in that way. Okay, we're now moving on to goal 4, which is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all major sources in the Fraser Valley. So I showed at the beginning of the presentation major emission sources of greenhouse gases. One of the categories that dominated was light and heavy duty vehicles. And so again, we'll follow the strategies under goal 1 to continue to enhance transit, to promote electric vehicles, and other actions like that to reduce greenhouse gases from on-road sources. Another major source of greenhouse gas emissions was from heating and natural gas. So we'll explore and support alternative sources of heat and make recommendations and guidelines that can guide our municipalities and developers for new buildings and for retrofitting existing buildings to use alternative energy or to at least reduce their consumption. Agricultural sources are another major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll work collaboratively with this sector to reduce their emissions. I mentioned under a previous goal that one option for reducing ammonia emissions could include better manure management practices, that it could include, for example, collection of the material in an anaerobic digester. and doing so would also substantially reduce methane emissions, a greenhouse gas, and these anaerobic digesters can collect the methane gas, which some of it can displace natural gas in a utility pipeline. So there are a number of interconnected potential benefits with some of the strategies and actions that we are presenting. Of course, we will also look to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from non-road engines and equipment following strategies under Goal 1. Landfills are another source of greenhouse gas emissions, but we are already taking actions to reduce emissions of GHGs from landfills. Methane capture is in place in some landfills in the region and is planned for others. And as well, our solid waste management plan includes in it an organics ban that will be coming in the next couple of years, where organic materials will be prohibited from being thrown away. It's a similar process to what Metro Vancouver has started just this year, actually. That'll also reduce methane emissions from landfills. And finally, we will be exhibiting organizational leadership as a government entity and leading the way to show other organizations how they can reduce their emissions. We'll continue to work at increasing public understanding of climate change to encourage personal action, and we may explore opportunities for carbon sequestration as well. And again, we will develop specific indicators and targets to assess our progress, the specifics of which will have to be worked out. So there are a number of common strategies that will be implemented to achieving all of the goals in our air quality management plan. The first of which is to lead by example, essentially, to exhibit organizational leadership and reduce our own emissions and share with others how we have done that. We will determine the feasibility of acquiring regulatory authority in some form over air emissions in our region. We will continue to communicate with the public causes and impacts of degraded air quality so that they can take action to reduce their emissions. And we will continue to support research efforts that inform air quality science, impacts, and solutions in the Fraser Valley. Some other ideas that we are considering include incorporating energy management into our plan in some way. This would probably be linked quite closely with greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies. And we're also working on determining how we will develop a communications strategy. We know that some other areas or jurisdictions that have developed air quality management plans have had advisory roundtables, committees, and what have you that have been directing the work. And so through our forthcoming consultation with stakeholders in the Fraser Valley, we'll determine if there's interest and ability in doing that. And in terms of reporting, we will plan to do a 5-year comprehensive review once the plan has been completed to assess how we're doing, as well as regular interval reviews on either an annual or a midterm basis. Finally, there are a tremendous number of opportunities before us with respect to our plan and the directions that it can go. It's very, very exciting to be in our position right now. We have very strong support from elected officials and senior management to try unique and innovative things. We have support to go beyond essentially what might be required, and it is a great place to be, to have the flexibility to go for new things. However, we do have a number of challenges as well. And I'm sure many of you, particularly if you're from smaller organizations, can relate to this. We have a very small staff to draw upon to develop and implement all of the different programs and plans and strategies that have been mentioned. So we'll have to be creative and collaborate with others in order to achieve the objectives that we have set out. And of course, a challenge that I've been mentioning throughout is that we do have planning authority only when it comes to air quality management in our region. So we have to work closely with the Ministry of Environment and senior levels of government on some aspects that we don't have direct control over. So I'm going to close off by again putting things in context with where we are at developing a new air quality management plan. We're developing the preliminary framework. I've shared with you some of the ideas that we have for that today. Very shortly we'll be engaging with stakeholders to get some preliminary feedback and thoughts, and I would encourage that from all of you as well. If you think we have missed something, if you think there may be challenges in completing a certain strategy or action, we do want to hear from you, and we will be reaching out to our networks in the Fraser Valley as well. And again, as I mentioned, we do have the intention of completing an air quality management plan document. I guess I'll emphasize at this point as well that we do envision it to be a relatively a user-friendly and accessible document that anyone who is interested in can understand. So it's going to be as succinct as possible, but we intend to have that document go forward to the FVRD board for consideration by the end of this year. So look for more to come on this topic in the near future. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thanks very much for your attention, and I do welcome comments, questions, and feedback now and at any point in the future. Thank you. Okay, and I am happy to take questions right now, as I indicated. So the first question that has come up indicates that the question reads, I noticed that cattle are a focus, but work that I've done in the past would indicate that poultry barns are a significant source of ammonia and particulate matter. Yes, I absolutely agree, and that is what our emissions inventory indicates as well. So there will be focus on strategies and actions that address poultry and other agricultural sources as well as cattle. Another question reads that if air pollution enters the Fraser Valley from Vancouver or from sources in the west, what partnerships are being developed between the regional districts? I'm not even sure where to start with answering this question, because to answer it simply is that there are a number of interagency efforts between Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley Regional District. The Ministry of Environment, Environment Canada are also often involved, but we at the Fraser Valley Regional District are part of a number of interagency committees and efforts to, again, to better understand air quality and air pollution movement throughout the valley and to address ways of reducing it. So a couple of examples I can give is that the FVRD is a member of both the International Airshed Strategy Committee and the Lower Fraser Valley Air Quality Coordinating Committee. The latter actually meets on a quarterly basis. So these are air quality management agencies from across the Lower Fraser Valley, including some members from the US. And we meet routinely to discuss basically what we're doing, what sort of trends in emissions and monitoring we're seeing, and how we can work together to improve air quality in all parts of the Lower Fraser Valley. And another great example that I can give is the development and now the implementation of the regional ground level ozone strategy. So that was a collaboration between not only the Fraser Valley Regional District and Metro Vancouver, but a number of other partners as well, including, and I hope I don't miss anyone here, including the BC Ministry of Environment, Environment Canada, and Port Metro Vancouver. And we all work together to develop a strategy and to develop policy directions that basically both the western portion of the region, Metro Vancouver, and the eastern portion of the region, the Fraser Valley Regional District, things that we can each do to try to ultimately reduce ambient ozone concentrations. So a lot is being done to collaborate, and we will continue to do so. Okay, the next question that has come up is, how much does it cost to maintain a station, I assume an air quality monitoring station, for a year, and who pays for this? That is a great question, and cannot think of a clear dollar figure off the top of my head. I will note that it's in the tens of thousands of dollars per station. And basically how it works in the Lower Fraser Valley right now is that Metro Vancouver, because they have so many more stations than the Fraser Valley, they actually operate the entire Lower Fraser Valley network. So they operate and maintain stations in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley Regional District. The Fraser Valley Regional District, then we pay Metro Vancouver to maintain the stations located in our region. So it's paid for by the Regional District. The next question is, can you say more about the FVRD taking on regulatory authority? What would this look like? Presumably you need to acquire additional resources. Yes. Do you have a timeline? Well, about all I can say about this prospect right now is it is something we are thinking about and will be exploring. And so probably what it will look like in terms of the air quality management plan is something similar to what I had written in the slide, which is basically that we will pursue options to acquire regulatory authority, and there will be a date on there. It could be within the next 5 years, say, just as an example, that we will pursue all of the options. I can say that there are different potential options for that. It may or may not look like what Metro Vancouver has, for example. There are different levels of authority, so to speak, or different levels of responsibility that we may be able to require. So we're not sure what it would look like. We need to look into it, but this is our way of indicating that we will be looking at it. I think I already answered it, but yes, we would need to acquire additional resources. That would be a very big thing that we would need to do in order to take this on. But again, we'll be looking at, and there have been some internal documents developed in the past that we will compile and refresh to look at different options and different costing options. We would probably try to do something that would be revenue neutral, so that would not cost additional fees, but again, we would have to look at exactly how that might play out. So the timeline part, I would say hopefully within the next 5 years or less, we will at least have a plan going forward. We will have determined if we will pursue it or not and what it might look like. The next question reads, with air monitoring, are you able to determine source point pollution? Are the stations downwind? If not, do you use wind data to generate wind roses to quantify how much downwind the stations are? Well, we have basically a wealth of information when it comes to dominant sources of pollution. We do know what major point sources of pollution across the Lower Fraser Valley Airshed are, because they are permitted either by Metro Vancouver or by the Ministry of Environment, and they're also required under Environment Canada through NPRI, the National Pollutant Release Inventory, to report their emissions. And so there's basically with station locations, there are a number of reasons that a station may be located in any one area. Absolutely, some stations will be located downwind of some sources, but some stations are also situated, near a residential area to understand what the concentration of contaminants for residents living in that area may be. So I guess the other thing that I can respond to this question with is that the air quality monitoring stations also do measure meteorological parameters. So they're measuring wind speed, direction, temperature, and things like that. So yes, wind roses can be generated to determine the dominant direction of wind flow, and that can be used in collaboration with point source information. I will also note that there are a large number of area and line sources in the Lower Fraser Valley as well, but they can can be combined to determine where some of the pollutants may be coming from. And just as I've received a note from a listener to provide an approximate cost for maintaining an air quality monitoring station. It's in the realm, as I said, tens of thousands of dollars per year. It's approximately $40,000 to $50,000, depending on the station, to maintain a single station on an annual basis. The next question asks for more information on the FVRD specific objectives for ammonia and toxic air pollutants and how they will be implemented in regulatory decisions. So what we are thinking of at this time, and what our intention is to conduct a comprehensive, detailed review that will look worldwide at what different jurisdictions have in place for example, objectives for ammonia and different select toxic air pollutants. And from that, we anticipate that recommendations will come out with respect to what might make sense in the Fraser Valley context. So, this will be a process that takes time, but once we have the study, once we have recommendations and have considered it internally and also with stakeholders and with our neighbors, we will consider establishing our own air quality objectives for some of these contaminants. At this point in time, because we don't have regulatory authority, these would be, they would be objectives, they would be goals, they would be something that we would compare our own monitoring data with, but they wouldn't, at this point in time, they wouldn't have legal or regulatory authority. That being said, what we know is that, especially through projects that are permitted, and particularly through large projects that go through an environmental assessment process, it would be expected, and I think if the FVRD was involved in the environmental assessment process, it would be expected that these objectives would at least be considered, even though they would not be not need to be adhered to as strictly as provincial or federal standards for us. So it's more, setting goals and objectives and targets for our own purposes and for consideration in permitting and regulatory processes. I hope that answers your question. I see that there are no additional questions at this time. So again, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time and interest in this webinar, and as I mentioned before, I do welcome any additional comments or feedback at any point. You can email or phone me. I am also told to let you all know that you should complete the online evaluation for this webinar. The link will be sent to all attendees by email, so that will greatly help the organizers in assessing the webinar. Thank you very much.